Oh yeah, don't tell the cops. Don't. Shh. You gotta keep this a secret. But I built an awesome gaming PC for 600 Australian dollars. That equates to around 380 US dollars for my American fans out there. Not that I have any. But the PC both performs great and looks brilliant. So let's jump into the video. To start things off, for the motherboard, we've got a B450M-A Pro Max from MSI. Now this is a very bog standard B450 motherboard that should do the trick to get you up and running. Now some of the standout features of this board is the single 4-pin CPU power, the single M.2 slot, and the non-reinforced PCI slot. Yeah, it's a pretty bog standard board, but it should be fine and more than enough for a Ryzen 5 2600. Speaking of which, for the CPU, we've got the Ryzen 5 2600. Now I picked this up for 53 Australian dollars on Marketplace, and yeah, it was actually a really good deal, and I would say 53 bucks is something I would pay no more for. And the CPU looks to be in very good condition, so I would be very surprised if this didn't boot. Now for RAM, we've gone with some good old G-Skill Ripjaws, 3600 MHz DDR4, I believe it's CL16, but really you can't go wrong with these RAM sticks. They're very reliable, and generally if they don't work out of the box, you can pretty much just send them back and get a replacement unit. That's our RAM installed. Next, for the SSD, we've got a 500GB WD Blue SN570. Now this is a good enough SSD, good for boot. I would recommend, if you want to download lots of games, I would recommend getting a 1TB, but to get started, 500GB is more than enough. You can definitely fit a few games on there, but if you want more storage, I'd recommend going with the 1TB option. Next is for the CPU cooler. Now for this, I've got the Ryzen 5 2600 Wraith Stealth Cooler, but what I've done is actually I've taken off this plastic outer shell and spray painted it white, so it actually does quite nicely in the build, and you'll see that it matches with the cable extensions later. So for now, let's install this. Now for thermal paste, I've just got some cheap and cheerful $2.75 thermal paste from eBay, but it should do the trick. Now me personally, I think that that is actually looking quite nice. I would definitely say that that is a nice looking CPU cooler on the system. For the case, we've got the Cooler Master MB311L. Now this is a nice little budget micro ATX case. I think it cost me 89 Australian dollars. And I would say that it's definitely quite good if you're on a budget and want some RGB in your case, some good airflow, and a nice building experience. Just make sure the IO shield clicks in place, and then you should be good to go. Now first thing you want to do is just check that the motherboard standoffs align, and for me they already do, so I can simply slot in the motherboard. Now I just want to make sure that it lines up with the IO shield. If your motherboard does come with baked in IO shields, it's really just that one nice step that saves you a little bit of hassle, but IO shields aren't that scary overall, and they're pretty easy once you get them done. Now for the power supply, we went with the EVGA 500 watt bronze. Yeah, it's definitely a good unit, has some nice black cables that are a little bit of a mess right now, but it should definitely do the job. So I'm going to install that, and then we'll get to our graphics card. Okay, so I've now installed my power supply cables, and now's the time that I want to bring out my cable extensions. Now these are from EZDIY on Amazon, and they cost me $34, but I think it should really help to make this build really come together, because the white cable extensions will match the white CPU cooler, and overall I think it'll look really nice. So after about an hour of cable management, it's finally time to install the GPU. Now the GPU is the 1660 Super by ASUS. It's the Phoenix model, which only has one fan, one DisplayPort, one HDMI, and one DVI port. It's definitely not a terrible card, but it is alright. It's not the best, but it gets the job done. And yeah, that's our GPU installed. It looks a little low down. It looks a little bit, let's just say goofy at the moment, but we can fix that. And yeah, that's the PC built. I reckon it doesn't look bad, and for $600, I don't reckon you could build a better system, unless you bought more used parts, but the idea of this system is that most of the parts are brand new. Okay, so we've now got the system all built and ready, and I think it looks quite nice overall. The white cable extensions really match the CPU cooler quite nicely, and I would say that I'm actually quite happy with it. So, after all this, let's see if it turns on. And it does. Got some RGB, and if I press this button, it changes the color. So let's set that to white. And I would say that that is looking quite nice overall. Got some white RGB and some nice white cable extensions, and it's really bringing the build together. So let's run some benchmarks. Okay, so we're currently playing Siege at 1080p max settings, and you can see that we're getting a steady 144 FPS on average, which is really nice to see. But yeah, the Ryzen 5 2600 is holding us back a little bit. As you can see, our GPU is not fully maxed out, but I would say that this is more than a respectable result. And yeah, we won. Now in Fortnite at 1080p Pro settings, you can see that we're getting a quite nice average FPS of around 134 FPS, which is really quite good. Now again, you can see that we are limited by our CPU, as our GPU is sitting at around 60%, but that shouldn't be too much of an issue, as with an upgrade you could easily upgrade, well, conceivably up to a 5800X3D. Not that I'd recommend doing that, as that would not be suitable for the 4-pin CPU power connector, but I would say that you could definitely go up to something like a Ryzen 5 5600 and your system would be perfectly fine. And again, as CPUs are getting a lot cheaper as we move to the AM5 platform, this is actually quite a nice upgrade path. Now let's jump into GTA. Now in GTA at 1080p high settings, you can see that we're getting a very comfortable 120 FPS on average. Now this is a really good result, as this game could be played at 60 FPS, but playing at 120 FPS just makes it that little bit extra smooth and just really adds to that nice smooth gameplay. Again, you can see that we are being heavily bottlenecked by our CPU as our GPU isn't under load, but again, that issue can be resolved later with a CPU upgrade. So now I think it's time for the verdict. So all in all, I'm really happy with how this build turned out. The PC both performs great and looks really nice with those white cable extensions and the white spray painted CPU cooler. I'll definitely have to do that in another PC flip. For now though, I'm going to list this on Facebook Marketplace for around 650 bucks, so I make around a $50 profit, and hopefully she sells pretty quickly. But overall, all in all, I'm really happy with how this build turned out. Now if you like this video, be sure to subscribe, as I do a lot of PC flipping nowadays, and that's sort of the content that I stick to, because I find it fun and I make a little bit of money, and yeah, it's content I enjoy. So I hope you enjoyed as well. As always, I'm TechBiz and I'm out.